Hello, everyone. Today we're going to explore a true story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family traditions and wedding customs. Names and specific details have been changed to protect their privacy. What would you do if your wedding day, the most important day of your life, turned into your worst nightmare? Not because of rain, or a missing cake, or even a runaway groom, but because your new mother-in-law decided to use your sacred moment to assert her dominance over you in the most humiliating way possible. My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you about the day that was supposed to be the beginning of my fairy tale, but instead became a trauma that still haunts me 3 years later. This isn't just about one bad wedding day. This is about how toxic family dynamics can masquerade as tradition, how abuse can hide behind cultural customs, and how sometimes the people who are supposed to love and protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. I met David in college. He was everything I thought I wanted. Handsome, successful. From what appeared to be a close-knit family. His mother, Margaret, seemed warm and welcoming when I first met her. She smiled a lot, asked about my family, my career plans, my dreams. She even offered to help plan our wedding, which I thought was incredibly generous. Looking back now, I realize those weren't acts of kindness, they were reconnaissance missions. The red flags started small. Comments about my dress being a bit revealing when I wore a normal sundress to family dinner. Suggestions that I might want to tone down my personality, because David's family valued quiet, respectful women. Little digs about my cooking, my cleaning, my job. Always followed by a sweet smile and "I'm just trying to help, dear." But David always defended her. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say. "She means well. She just wants what's best for us." I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I loved him. And I thought love was enough to overcome anything. The wedding planning became a battlefield disguised as bonding time. Margaret had opinions about everything: the venue, the flowers, the guest list, even my dress. She wanted me to choose something more traditional, more appropriate for a woman joining the Thompson family. When I showed her my dream dress, a beautiful, modern A-line, with delicate lace sleeves, she actually wrinkled her nose and said, "Well, I suppose it's very... you..." I started to feel like I was losing myself, piece by piece. Every decision became a negotiation. Every choice a potential conflict. My own mother, bless her heart, tried to be supportive, but she was dealing with her own health issues and couldn't be as involved as she wanted to be. I felt alone, caught between wanting to please my future family and staying true to myself. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with this strange knot in my stomach, not the normal pre-wedding butterflies, something darker, more foreboding. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves, that every bride feels anxious on her wedding day. I had no idea that Margaret had been planning something that would change everything. I should have known something was wrong when I was 8 years old, playing dress-up in my mother's old wedding veil, spinning around our living room and declaring that my wedding would be the most beautiful day ever. I had it all planned out: the perfect dress, the perfect flowers, the perfect moment when I'd walk down the aisle to meet my Prince Charming. I'd watched every Disney movie, read every fairy tale, and believed with all my heart that love conquered all. My childhood was filled with those innocent dreams, I'd make my Barbie dolls have elaborate wedding ceremonies, complete with tissue paper trains and dandelion bouquets. I'd force my younger brother to play the groom while I marched down our hallway, humming "Here Comes the Bride." My parents would laugh and take pictures, never imagining that their little girl's wedding dreams would one day turn into a nightmare. As I got older, those dreams evolved but never disappeared. In high school, I'd flip through bridal magazines during study hall, bookmarking pages of gorgeous gowns and romantic venues. I imagined walking down the aisle to a man who would look at me like I was the most beautiful woman in the world, surrounded by family and friends who celebrated our love. When I met David, I thought all those childhood dreams were finally coming true. He was charming, successful, and seemed to adore me. Our early dates were perfect romantic dinners, long walks, deep conversations about our future together. He'd hold my hand and talk about the life we'd build together, the house we'd buy, the children we'd have. It felt like everything I'd ever dreamed of. But meeting his family was when the cracks first started to show. The Thompson family had what they called traditions, rigid rules about how women should behave, what they should wear, how they should speak. Margaret would smile sweetly while delivering cutting remarks about my appearance, my education, my family's simple background. She had a way of making me feel small while pretending to be helpful. "Oh, honey," she'd say, with that patronizing tone. "You'll learn. The Thompson women have always been known for their grace and dignity. It's something that comes naturally to some people. But don't worry, we can teach you." The implication was clear. I wasn't naturally graceful or dignified enough for their family. David's sister, Patricia, was Margaret's golden child, quiet, submissive, married to a man who made all the decisions, while she smiled and nodded. Margaret would constantly hold Patricia up as an example. "Look how lovely Patricia is," she'd say. "She understands what it means to be a proper wife. She never causes drama or makes scenes." I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was too outspoken. Maybe my career ambitions were selfish. Maybe I needed to change to fit into their world. The confident woman who had earned her master's degree and landed her dream job slowly began to shrink under Margaret's constant criticism disguised as guidance. The engagement party should have been another red flag. Margaret insisted on planning it, claiming she wanted to welcome me properly into the family. But the entire evening felt like a performance, where I was the only one who didn't know the script. Margaret gave a speech about family traditions and how important it was for new members to understand their place in the Thompson legacy. Looking back, I realize she was already planning what would happen at our wedding. The pieces were falling into place, the constant undermining of my confidence, the emphasis on tradition and respect, the way she positioned herself as the ultimate authority on what it meant to be a Thompson wife. But I was still living in my fairy tale, believing that love would overcome all obstacles, that my wedding day would be perfect despite the growing tension with my future mother-in-law. The morning of my wedding started beautifully. I woke up in the bridal suite at the historic inn where we'd chosen to have our ceremony. Sunlight streaming through the lace curtains. My dress hanging like a promise of happiness on the antique armoire. My maid of honor, Jessica, was already up, arranging the flowers and humming softly. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. My mother arrived early, tears already forming in her eyes as she helped me into my slip and began the careful process of getting me ready. Despite her recent chemotherapy treatments leaving her weak, she insisted on doing my hair herself, just like she'd promised when I was little. "My beautiful girl," she whispered, her hands gentle as she worked. "You look like an angel." The photographer captured those tender moments, my mother fastening my necklace, Jessica adjusting my veil, all of us laughing at something silly one of my bridesmaids said. These photos would later serve as the painful reminders of how perfect everything seemed before it all went wrong. Around 11 o'clock, 2 hours before the ceremony, Margaret knocked on the bridal suite door. She entered with her usual commanding presence, dressed in an elaborate navy dress that seemed more appropriate for a funeral than a wedding. Her smile was different that morning, sharper, more predatory. "Sarah, dear," she said, dismissing my mother and bridesmaids with a wave of her hand. "I need to speak with you privately. There's something important we need to discuss before the ceremony." My stomach dropped. Something in her tone, in the way she looked at me, sent chills down my spine. But I nodded, thinking maybe she wanted to give me some family heirloom or share some motherly wisdom. My bridesmaids reluctantly left, Jessica giving me a concerned look as she closed the door. Margaret sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap like she was about to deliver a business presentation. "Sarah, you're about to become a Thompson woman today. That's a privilege that comes with certain responsibilities." I waited, my heart beginning to race for reasons I couldn't yet understand. "The Thompson family has a long-standing tradition," she continued, her voice steady and cold. "When a new woman joins our family, she must demonstrate her respect and commitment to our values. It's a beautiful ceremony, really a symbol of humility and devotion that has been passed down for generations." The way she said humility made my skin crawl. "What kind of tradition?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's smile widened, but it never reached her eyes. "During the ceremony, just before you exchange vows with David, you'll kneel before me and the Thompson family elders. You'll apologize for any past disrespect or defiance you've shown, and pledge to honor the family above all else. It's really quite simple and meaningful." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "You want me to kneel and apologize during my wedding ceremony?" "It's tradition, dear. David's sister Patricia did it. His cousin Marie did it. Every Thompson bride for the past 60 years has participated in this beautiful ritual. It shows that you understand your place in our family hierarchy, and that you're willing to put the family's needs before your own selfish desires." The words hit me like physical blows. Selfish desires, family hierarchy. This wasn't a tradition, this was a power play, a public humiliation designed to break me down and establish Margaret's dominance from day one of my marriage. "What if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the gleam in her eyes. Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the steel underneath. "Well, that would be very unfortunate. You see, the ceremony can't proceed without this tradition being honored. The officiant has been informed, the family is expecting it, and David understands how important this is to our family's legacy." The room started to spin. "David knows about this." "Of course he knows, dear." Who do you think suggested we wait until this morning to tell you he thought it would be easier if you didn't have time to overthink things? The cold stone of St. Bar Mary's Church pressed against my knees through the thin fabric of my wedding dress as I knelt before Margaret Thompson and her assembled family court. The guests, my friends, my family, David's extended relatives sat in stunned silence, some gasping audibly, others whispering frantically to each other. This wasn't in the program. This wasn't what anyone expected. But here I was, on what should have been the happiest day of my life, being forced to perform this medieval ritual of submission, while my wedding photographer awkwardly continued snapping pictures. Probably not sure if this was supposed to be happening. Margaret stood before me like a queen receiving tribute from a conquered territory. She was savoring this moment. I could see it in her eyes, the way she held her shoulders back, the slight upward curve of her lips. This was what she had been planning all along. What every passive-aggressive comment and undermining gesture had been building toward. Sarah Marie Collins? She announced in a voice that carried through the entire church. You are about to join the Thompson family. Do you understand what this means? My mouth felt like sandpaper. I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath from the front pew. Could feel Jessica's eyes pouring into me from where she stood, frozen by the altar. David was there too, standing beside his groomsmen. And the look on his face, it wasn't surprise or outrage at his mother's behavior. It was expectation. He had known this was coming. I started, but Margaret cut me off. You have shown disrespect to this family during your engagement, she continued, her voice ringing with false authority. You have questioned our traditions, challenged our values, and put your own wants above the needs of the family unit. Today, you will acknowledge these failings and commit to being the kind of wife this family deserves. The accusations were absurd, but in that moment, with dozens of people staring at me, with my dress pooled around me on the cold floor, I felt like I was 8 years old again, being scolded by a strict teacher. The confident woman who had earned her MBA, who had landed a prestigious job, who had stood up in boardrooms and delivered presentations to executives, that woman seemed to disappear. Apologize for your defiance, Margaret commanded. Promise to honor your husband's family above all else. Vow to be a dutiful daughter-in-law who knows her place. The church was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I looked up at David, silently pleading for him to step in, to stop this humiliation, to be the man I thought I was marrying. But he just nodded slightly, encouraging me to comply. Some part of me that was still clinging to my fairy tale dreams whispered that if I just got through this moment, everything would be okay. The wedding would continue. I'd become Mrs. Thompson. And somehow, this nightmare would become just a weird story we'd laugh about years later. So I did it. I spoke the words Margaret wanted to hear. I apologize for any disrespect I've shown the Thompson family, I said, my voice barely audible. I promise to honor and obey not just my husband, but his family's wishes. I vow to be a dutiful daughter-in-law. The words tasted like poison in my mouth, but Margaret's smile was radiant. She placed her hand on my head like she was bestowing a blessing or claiming ownership. Rise, daughter. she said with mock warmth. "You may now join our family." I struggled to my feet, my legs shaking, my dress wrinkled and dusty from the stone floor. The congregation erupted in uncomfortable murmurs, and I could see my mother's face, pale with shock and rage. Jessica looked like she wanted to march down that aisle and drag me out of there. But the ceremony continued. The officiant, clearly uncomfortable, but apparently briefed on this tradition, cleared his throat and began the standard wedding service, as if nothing unusual had happened. As if I hadn't just been publicly humiliated and forced to submit to my future mother-in-law's twisted power game. David took my hands when I reached the altar, and for a moment, I searched his eyes for some sign of the man I'd fallen in love with. Some indication that he was as horrified by what had just happened as I was. Instead, I saw relief. Relief that I had complied, that I had passed his family's test, that I had proven myself willing to be molded into whatever shape they required. The wedding reception felt like I was sleepwalking through someone else's life. Guests approached me with forced smiles, offering congratulations that felt hollow after what they'd witnessed in the church. Some of my friends looked at me with pity, others with confusion, as if they were trying to reconcile the strong woman they knew with the person who had just knelt and apologized for crimes she hadn't committed. But it was during the father-daughter dance that everything truly unraveled. My dad, bless his heart, had been holding back his anger all evening. But as we swayed to butterfly kisses, he whispered in my ear, "Sweetheart, what happened back there wasn't right. That wasn't tradition, that was abuse." I wanted to defend David, to explain that it was just Margaret's way, that every family has their quirks. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, I knew my father was right. I had been played, manipulated, and ultimately betrayed by the man who was supposed to protect me. After the dance, I cornered David by the bar. The champagne had given me just enough courage to demand answers. "How long have you known about this tradition?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. David loosened his tie and avoided my eyes. "Sarah, you're making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be. Every Thompson bride goes through it. It's just Mom's way of what?" I interrupted. "Of humiliating me, of establishing her dominance, of making sure I know my place, of making sure you understand that family comes first," he snapped. And for the first time, I saw the real David Thompson. Not the charming man who had wooed me, but his mother's son, entitled, controlling, and completely comfortable with my humiliation. "You planned this," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "You knew exactly what she was going to do. And you let it happen. You wanted it to happen." David's expression hardened. "I wanted my wife to show respect for my family. Is that so wrong? Patricia never complained when she went through it. She understood that marriage means sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" I laughed bitterly. "What did you sacrifice, David? What did any of the Thompson men sacrifice? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like only the women are expected to give up their dignity." That's when he said the words that shattered whatever remained of my love for him. "Maybe you're just too selfish to understand what real commitment looks like." I stared at this man I had promised to love and honor just hours earlier, and I didn't recognize him. Or maybe I was finally seeing him clearly for the first time. The romantic gestures, the sweet words, the promises of partnership. It had all been a performance designed to get me to this point, where I was legally bound to him and socially pressured to accept whatever treatment his family dished out. Where did you even get this tradition? I asked. Because I've researched the Thompson family history for our wedding program, and there's no mention of this anywhere. David's jaw tightened. It's been around for decades. Mom went through it when she married Dad. It's how things are done in our family. But something in his tone, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, told me there was more to this story. Later that night, alone in our honeymoon suite while David showered, I called Patricia. If this was really a long-standing tradition, she would have stories, details, maybe even photos from her own wedding. What she told me changed everything. Sarah. Patricia's voice was quiet, almost fearful. There are no photos because Mom made sure there weren't any, and it wasn't the same for me. I mean, yes, I had to kneel. But it was just Mom and Dad's siblings, not the whole congregation. And I didn't have to apologize for anything specific. Mom just said it was about showing respect. My blood ran cold. What are you saying, Patricia? I'm saying what happened to you today was different, more elaborate, more cruel. It's like she's been planning it specifically for you, making it worse because... She trailed off. Because what? Because she never wanted David to marry you. She told me once that you were too independent, too strong-willed. She said you needed to be broken down before you could be built back up into a proper Thompson wife. The phone slipped from my hand as the full scope of Margaret's manipulation became clear. This hadn't been about tradition at all. It had been about breaking me, publicly and thoroughly, in front of everyone I cared about. The truth about Margaret's own wedding came out 3 weeks later, during what was supposed to be a pleasant family dinner. I had been the dutiful daughter-in-law since the wedding, swallowing my pride and playing the role Margaret had scripted for me. But that night, after a few glasses of wine, David's elderly great-aunt Helen let something slip that unraveled everything. You know, Sarah, Helen said, her voice trembling with age and wine. What happened at your wedding reminded me so much of poor Margaret's wedding day. Though I suppose it's fitting, considering how badly she was treated by David's grandmother. The table went silent. Margaret's face turned ashen, and David quickly tried to change the subject. But Helen continued, oblivious to the tension she'd created. Oh, yes. It was terrible. Margaret was forced to scrub the kitchen floors in her wedding dress because David's grandmother said she needed to learn her place, made her do it right there in front of all the wedding guests. Most humiliating thing I'd ever seen, until... She gestured vaguely in my direction. Margaret abruptly stood up and left the room. But the damage was done. The family's dirty secret was out. And suddenly, everything made sense. Margaret hadn't been preserving some noble tradition she had been perpetuating, a cycle of abuse that had been inflicted on her decades earlier. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself researching everything I could about generational trauma, about how victims of abuse sometimes become abusers themselves, about the psychology of power and control within family systems. What I learned made me sick to my stomach. Margaret's behavior wasn't unique. Throughout history, women who had been broken down by patriarchal systems often became the enforcers of those same systems, passing the trauma on to the next generation of women. It was a twisted form of hazing. If I had to suffer, then you have to suffer too. But understanding Margaret's motivation didn't make what she had done to me acceptable. If anything, it made it worse. Because she knew exactly how it felt to be humiliated and degraded. Yet she had chosen to inflict that same pain on me. I started digging deeper into the Thompson family history, talking to older relatives, piecing together a pattern that went back generations. The tradition wasn't ancient or noble. It was a relatively recent invention by David's great-grandmother, a bitter woman who had been abandoned by her first husband and had taken her rage out on every woman who joined the family afterward. Each generation had added their own twist to the ritual. David's grandmother had made Margaret scrub floors. Margaret had made me kneel and apologize publicly. Each iteration was designed to be more psychologically damaging than the last, as if the women were competing to see who could inflict the most pain. The most disturbing part was how the men in the family had not only allowed this to continue, but had actively participated in it. They had watched their wives, sisters, and daughters-in-law be humiliated and had done nothing to stop it. Worse, they had convinced themselves that this abuse was actually beneficial, that it built character, taught respect, strengthened family bonds. When I confronted David with what I had learned, his response was predictable. "That's just how things are done in our family," he said with a shrug. "You can't change generations of tradition just because you're uncomfortable with it." "It's not tradition," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "It's trauma. It's a cycle of abuse that your family has been perpetuating for decades, and you're all too cowardly to break it." David's face darkened. "Don't you dare call my family abusive. My mother went through the same thing, and it made her stronger. It taught her discipline and respect. Maybe if you had learned those lessons earlier in life, you wouldn't be so difficult to deal with." That word difficult hit me like a slap. I had heard it so many times since joining this family. Difficult, stubborn, ungrateful, selfish. All code words for a woman who refused to disappear quietly, who had the audacity to maintain her own thoughts and opinions. "What about the next generation?" I asked. "What about our future daughters? Are you going to stand by and watch your mother humiliate them too? Are you going to tell them it's character building when they're forced to kneel and apologize for being strong?" David's answer chilled me to the bone. If that's what it takes to teach them proper respect, then yes. In that moment, I realized that the man I had married wasn't just complicit in his family's toxic behavior, he was its future guardian. He would ensure that this cycle of abuse continued, that any daughters we might have would endure the same humiliation I had experienced, that the Thompson family's legacy of breaking women would continue indefinitely. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. The next Sunday, family dinner was supposed to be just another exercise in playing the perfect daughter-in-law. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering my courage, researching my facts, and most importantly, reminding myself of who I used to be before I let this family diminish me. The woman who had graduated summa cum laude, who had negotiated million-dollar deals, who had never backed down from a challenge, That woman was still inside me, and it was time to let her out. I arrived at the Thompson house with a folder full of documentation, family records, psychological research, testimonies from other family members I had quietly interviewed. But more than that, I arrived with something I hadn't felt in months: righteous anger. Margaret greeted me at the door with her usual patronizing smile. "Sarah, dear, you look lovely today. I hope you're feeling more settled into your role as a Thompson wife." "Actually?" "Margaret," I said, stepping into the foyer with my shoulders back and my head high. "I'm feeling more like myself than I have in quite some time. And we need to talk. All of us." Something in my tone made her smile falter. David appeared from the living room, already looking annoyed. "Sarah, what's this about? I thought we agreed you were going to try harder to fit in." "I never agreed to fit into a family that thrives on psychological abuse," I replied, my voice carrying through the house. "And I'm not going to pretend anymore that what happened at our wedding was acceptable." Margaret's mask slipped completely. "How dare you come into my home and your home?" I interrupted, and I could hear the steel in my own voice. "Your home, where you've been plotting to break me down since the day David and I got engaged. Your home, where you've been perpetuating a cycle of abuse that goes back 3 generations. I opened my folder and pulled out copies of the documents I'd gathered. "Let's talk about tradition. Margaret, let's talk about how your mother-in-law forced you to scrub floors in your wedding dress. Let's talk about how you decided to pass that trauma on to me, but make it even worse by doing it in front of 200 people." The color drained from Margaret's face. David stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "You had no right to go digging through our family history." "I had every right to understand what I was subjected to." I shot back. And what I found was generations of women being systematically broken down by this family's toxic dynamics. Well, guess what? I'm not broken. And I'm not playing this game anymore. Margaret recovered her composure and drew herself up to her full height. "You ungrateful little—" "No," I said, holding up my hand. "We're done with the name-calling. We're done with the manipulation. We're done with pretending that abuse is tradition. What you did to me was wrong. Margaret, what was done to you was wrong, and it ends here. You can't just waltz in here and demand we change our ways." Margaret sputtered. "This is how the Thompson family has always what I demanded. Always traumatized women. Always taught sons that it's acceptable to watch their wives be humiliated. Always made sure that the next generation of women knows they're worthless unless they submit to whatever degradation you dream up." I could see other family members gathering in the doorway. Patricia, her husband, David's father, the cousins who had witnessed my wedding day humiliation. Good. They needed to hear this too. "I researched your family history. Margaret, real history. Not the sanitized version you tell yourselves. The kneeling, the apologizing, the public humiliation, none of it goes back more than 70 years. It's not some ancient tradition. It's a pattern of abuse that started with one bitter woman and has been passed down like a poisonous heirloom." Margaret's eyes flashed with rage. "You don't understand what it means to be part of a family, what it means to show respect." "Respect?" I laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about respect? Where was the respect for me on my wedding day? Where was the respect for my dignity, my autonomy, My right to not be publicly humiliated. Where was David's respect for me when he stood by and watched it happen? I turned to face the assembled family members. And where was all of your respect when you sat there in that church and watched a woman be forced to kneel and apologize for imaginary crimes? Not one of you spoke up. Not one of you said this was wrong. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken truths and buried shame. Finally, Patricia spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah's right." Margaret whirled around to face her daughter. "Patricia, don't you dare!" "No, Mom," Patricia said, her voice growing stronger. "She's right. What happened to Sarah was wrong. What happened to you was wrong. And I've been too afraid to say anything because I didn't want to be the next target." 3 years have passed since that confrontation in the Thompson family living room. And I'm writing this from my own apartment, a space that belongs entirely to me, decorated with colors I love, filled with books I choose, and most importantly, free from the suffocating weight of other people's expectations. The divorce was ugly, as I expected it would be. David fought me every step of the way. Not because he loved me, but because losing me meant admitting that his family's traditions were wrong. Margaret hired an expensive lawyer and tried to paint me as mentally unstable, claiming that I had sudden onset personality changes after the wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation was now trying to convince a judge that I was the problem. But I had allies they didn't expect. Patricia found her voice after years of silence and testified about the family's history of psychological abuse. Great Aunt Helen, bless her heart, provided a sworn statement about Margaret's own traumatic wedding experience. Most surprisingly, David's cousin Marie, who had endured her own version of the tradition 15 years earlier, came forward with her story. The judge was a woman in her 60s who had clearly seen her share of family dysfunction. When Margaret's lawyer tried to argue that this was simply a cultural misunderstanding, Judge Martinez looked over her glasses and said, "Counselor, I don't care what you call it. Forcing someone to kneel and apologize publicly on their wedding day isn't tradition. It's emotional abuse." The divorce was finalized 8 months later. I kept my maiden name and my dignity, and I walked away with enough assets to start fresh somewhere new. David kept the house, his family's approval, and the promise that he would find a more suitable wife who wouldn't cause such drama. I moved to Portland, where nobody knows my story unless I choose to tell it. I started working for a nonprofit that helps women escape abusive relationships. And I've discovered that my experience, while painful, has given me unique insight into how abuse can hide behind the facade of family tradition and cultural expectations. The most surprising outcome has been my relationship with Patricia. After years of being Margaret's golden child, she finally saw the system for what it was and began her own journey toward independence. She's in therapy now, working through decades of conditioning and slowly rebuilding her sense of self-worth. We talk every few weeks. Two women who escaped the same toxic system by different paths. Margaret still sends me Christmas cards, as if we're old friends who simply lost touch. The cards are always signed with love and forgiveness from your Thompson family. As if I'm the one who needs to be forgiven, I throw them away without reading them. Because I've learned that some relationships are too toxic to salvage, even in the name of forgiveness. But here's what I've learned in these 3 years of freedom standing up to abuse is not a one-time event. It's a daily choice to value yourself, to refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth, to break cycles that have been generations in the making. It's choosing to be difficult when difficult means protecting your dignity. It's choosing to be selfish when selfish means prioritizing your own well-being. The 8-year-old girl who dreamed of a fairy tale wedding would be heartbroken to know how my story turned out. But the woman I am today understands that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for happy endings, but for the right to write your own story. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away from the life you thought you wanted in order to find the life you actually deserve. To any woman reading this who recognizes herself in my story, you are not difficult. You are not selfish. You are not ungrateful. You are a human being who deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, and no tradition, no matter how old or how deeply entrenched, gives anyone the right to take that away from you. The fairy tale I dreamed of as a child was about finding someone who would love me. What I learned as an adult is that the most important love story you'll ever have is the one between you and yourself. And that story, that one gets to have a happy ending. Your voice matters. Your dignity matters. You matter. And sometimes, the most beautiful thing you can do is refuse to kneel. This story reveals how psychological abuse can masquerade as family tradition, following Sarah's journey from a hopeful bride to a woman who refused to perpetuate generational trauma. What began as Margaret's attempt to break Sarah's spirit through public humiliation ultimately backfired, exposing decades of cyclical abuse within the Thompson family. Sarah's courage to investigate, confront, and ultimately escape this toxic dynamic not only freed herself but empowered other family members to question these harmful traditions. The narrative demonstrates that breaking free from abusive systems requires not just individual courage, but the willingness to challenge deeply entrenched family dynamics, even when it means losing relationships and facing social consequences. Sarah's transformation from victim to advocate illustrates that healing from trauma often involves helping others avoid similar experiences, and that true strength sometimes means choosing your own dignity over family acceptance.